and I'd like to invite Gordon to commence.
Great, thank you very much, Hazel, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak to Sydney on a Wednesday morning. I did see that the forecast temperature is about 24. Full sun, you'll be pleased to know it's about 2 degrees in Oxford and quite dark. So I am there in spirit, if you like. The presentation today is by myself with Dr. Innocenti, and is a combined effort with ourselves and Dr. Sarah McGill from Oxford University. Next slide, please. This is part of a much larger project of work. We've been running this now for nearly 5 years. It's focused on the changing world of work, new kinds of employment contracts, changing compensation and benefit systems and the management issues that go with that. Largely, it is both about individual behavior, which we'll talk about today, but it's also about corporate behavior. We're trying to bridge, if you like, these two parts of the game. We emphasize the impact of technological change on the workplace, skills, labor productivity, and of course, we are very conscious of COVID-19. And indeed, in the last year, we've put a lot of effort actually into crystallizing some of the lessons learned. Next slide, please. The building blocks for our research program are, as I say, a behavioral perspective informed by cognitive science, economics, and the like. It's focused on individuals, their attributes, their dispositions, and decision-making competence. We are, like many people who would be speaking in this symposium, very conscious about individual behavior, not as the archetypical rational economic man, so much as the nuances and the differences between people by who they are, what they are, and how they make decisions. We are also very concerned to take seriously the context in which people make decisions. And for us, of course, given that we're working over 16 countries in this presentations and now over 18 countries through representative sample surveys, we're very conscious that to talk about behavior absent sensitivity to the country context is to kind of miss, if you like, much of the game. It is, as I say, underpinned by a comparative perspective across 16 jurisdictions, now nearly 18, or to be 18. And we're, if you like, trying to judge behavior in context, so to speak. Next slide. And the next slide. In the interest of time, and I don't want to steal time from my co-presenter, so I'm very conscious to move it on considerably. The themes in the paper and the presentation include the increasing vulnerability of working men and women to changing labour markets and labour market conditions. We're conscious also of the shocks in the system that can disrupt, if you like, customary behaviour and prompt actually reconsideration or not actually of future prospects. We're very interested in the intersection between income and health. There, if you like, our sample survey, their experience of short-term and long-term interruptions in earned incomes due to health shocks as much as anything else. We're interested also in how short-term vulnerability can translate into or foreshorten long-term planning horizons. We're interested, if you like, in how people think about the future, having experienced things in the past, and given their, if you like, resources and opportunity set, can they in fact actually look beyond, look into the future like we would often like people to plan for the future. And this, we believe, is especially relevant for pension and retirement planning, which is in fact the content that I will hand over to my colleague to present. So over to you, Stefania.
Oh, thank you very much, Gordon, and good evening, everybody, and thank you very much. Actually, good morning, I should say. Thank you very much to all of you for being here. So what we are going to present to you today, it's an empirical paper that starts from very simple premises. So a report from the OECD in 2019 showed that most individuals around the world are extremely concerned about their financial security in old age. And for 5 years, actually, I would say earlier, the American Psychological Associations also revealed that 2/3 of the US citizens are very worried and anxious about their future financial planning. But at the same time, there is growing evidence that a huge number of households around the world live on the financial edge, and some of them have to resort to extreme measures if something happens to them. And we know also that many of them do not necessarily engage in long-term financial planning. And we think that the COVID pandemic might have exacerbated these trends a great deal, actually. So whether workers are able to plan adequately for their retirement is of increasing concerns for policymakers, I think, around the world. And what we wish to do in this paper is specifically to explore the link between financial vulnerability and retirement planning. And the idea here is to try and understand why some households do prepare for retirement slightly more effectively, or more effectively, I should say, than others. This is an empirical paper, and there are three main hypotheses that sort of frame, let's say, our exploration. The first one is actually the most important one, so the core of the paper. And here we know that retirement planning sort of involves some form of long-term thinking, but financial vulnerability instead sort of triggers some negative and short-term thinking. And for this reason, we sort of expect to see in the data that financial vulnerability will be accompanied by a lower propensity to plan for retirement. But we also have two ancillary hypotheses that regard age and education. And specifically, we think that in line with previous literature, we should expect age to be positively associated with planning, because people tend to think about the retirement when they grow older. But we also expect education to be positively associated with retirement planning, because planning for retirement requires actually a set of abilities like forecasting the expected future income or trying to forecast retirement age and survival probabilities. And these are hard tasks for individuals that might be less educated or less financially literate, as somebody might say. And to test this hypothesis, what we do is to exploit within and across country variation in financial vulnerability and socioeconomic characteristics, thanks to a survey that we collected in February and March 2019, so a while ago now. And we surveyed around 13,000 working individuals in 16 countries, and they were all aged between 20 and 70. So it's quite a varied pool of country, as you can see from the flags there. So I want to give you, before I dig deeper into the results and to the analysis, I would like to give you a bit of a preview of the results. And if I had to summarize in one sentence what the paper shows, I would say that basically we establish a sort of the relationship between financial vulnerability and retirement planning. And we see that this relationship is mostly negative. And we see that past negative health episodes or like shortfalls in earned income reduce the likelihood of thinking about retirement by 10 and 29% respectively, whereas the inability to save decreases the probability of planning for retirement by roughly 41%. So in a nutshell, the results only shows that those individuals that can afford to plan for retirement actually do so. And that we think that the long-term cost of this cannot be really neglected by policymakers, because it's going to be affecting individuals for a long time. So how do we measure retirement planning? Well, what we do is to rely on a well-established, although not perfect, method that is present in the literature. So previous scholars have measured the extent to which individuals are planning for retirement by simply asking them to declare how often they think about retirement. And these scholars have been labeling as planners those who report thinking a lot or somewhat about retirement. And we follow a similar approach. But what we ask people is the following question: which of the following would you say is your biggest financial concern? And we offer them 5 options here reported in the legend in the figure, and people could have chosen between paying monthly bills, having enough money for a comfortable retirement, burdening my family and friends if I die prematurely, or offsetting credit card debts, or sort of open options like other. Only one options could have been selected, and the figure shows you that the share of individuals that in each country chose each answer option. And as you can see here, having enough money for a comfortable retirement is the most common, it's the #1 concern in 14 out of 16 countries in our data set, with the exception of Brazil and in Romania. So as per the literature I was mentioning above, we define as planners those who declare to be concerned about their future well-being in retirement. We also looked at a bit of the heterogeneity in concerns, so among the planners, and we see that those who plan for retirement are slightly older, less likely to be engaged in atypical work, more educated, and also wealthier, or meaning that they have a higher earned income. When it comes instead of financial vulnerability, I think we use a quite holistic approach, and we defined financial vulnerability as a self-assessed situation in which individuals experience some form of financial hardship that can be caused by a deterioration in one's financial situation, the inability to save, and this is pretty standard in the literature, but also by whether or not they have been experiencing negative health episodes that prevented them from working. And what we see when we look at the patterns of financial vulnerability is that there is a lot of heterogeneity here as well. Women are more likely to have experienced a worsening of their financial situation and less likely to save, whereas education seems to shelter from episodes of vulnerability. But more importantly, having lower income is on average associated with being less likely to save, more likely to suffer from ill health, and also higher chances to see a decline in the finances. So next, we conducted bivariate analysis by country to try and establish this link. And what we see is the sign that we expect, meaning those who suffer from episodes of financial vulnerability are less likely to plan for retirement. I don't want you to get lost into all the figures here, which are basically presenting the fractions of respondents that are planning for retirement by whether or not they have experienced some form of financial vulnerability. But I would like you to concentrate on the figure in the middle. And what you will see here is that in each country, those who plan for retirement are significantly more likely to have been able to save in the past. And what is important here is that this same relationship, which is also true also for the 2 other measures of financial vulnerability, seems to be pretty, not driven by a small number of countries, but pretty stable across the many countries that we have. I suspect that, of course, the bivariate analysis might not have convinced you. And for this reason, we ran a set of multivariate logic models where our dependent variable is whether the individual is planning for retirement or not, according to our definitions. And the 3 main regressors are the financial vulnerability measures I mentioned. We pull all countries together and the estimated coefficients are presented in the table in the left. But here again, what I would like to highlight is what is present in the bulbs on the right. And basically, the results are those that I sort of mentioned right at the beginning in the second slide of my talk. So those who have had negative health experiences, those who weren't able to save, or those who have been experiencing some form of shock in the past are significantly less likely to plan for the future. Now, you might wonder whether these relationships on pool basis actually do resist when we run country level regressions, because of course, every country that we have might be very different from one another. And here I'm plotting the coefficients of the country level regressions for the various measures of financial vulnerability on retirement planning. And generally what you can see is that the effects are generally negative and very strong and consistently significant for the two figures on in the middle and on your right of the screen, meaning for the inability to save and for past financial deteriorations, whereas it's less uncontroversial what the effect of past ill health is when we look at the country level, because it's significant at the 5% level only for 5 countries. But we also did another robustness check that I should mention right now very quickly, which is also to control for the Mercer Global Pension Index, to control for the adequacy of the retirement income system, but the results do stay stable. As we conduct multiple robustness checks, as you might imagine, we control for behavioral factor, we look at heterogeneity in effects, and we also move from planning per se, or sort of in an abstract sense, to action as well. So looking at whether people contribute to complementary pension funds to increase their financial security, and the results remain basically unaltered in the qualitative sense, aside from a change in the coefficient of past health events. So to summarize, for the sake of time, what we believe the paper shows, it sort of provides a robust correlational cross-country evidence of a negative relationship linking financial vulnerability and planning for retirement. The inability to save, episodes of negative health and past deterioration in one finances, they all reduce people planning horizon, as Gordon was suggesting at the beginning. And it sort of makes people more attentive and of course subject to their constraints to the immediate circumstances. And we think this is quite in line with the finite pool of worry hypothesis that is present in the psychology literature, but also with the findings in the economics of poverty literature, according to which when we face short-run emergencies due to the cognitive overload that these entail, the short-term emergencies take over the longer-term issues. And we think that this is of particular importance during the pandemic, when many individuals might have been exposed to increased vulnerability, and these episodes can and possibly will have long-term consequences. Just my concluding slide, as Gordon was mentioning, this is part of a larger research program, and of course we have ideas on how to move forward. And one of the main limitations of this study is that due to the identification strategy, we weren't able to establish causality. So trying to explore this is an obvious place to start, but we're also interested in exploring ways to help individuals saving more for their retirement and also more effectively, especially for young workers. And we are in the process of actually designing some experiments on this. And we are, lastly but not least, of course, interested in investigating how society in general, together with families and individuals per se, can manage the long-term effects of labor market and health related shocks. So this is my last slide, and we welcome any questions or comments that you might have.